I was told this story by someone who claimed he served in the Navy back in the 90s working cargo. According to him, one sailor lost everything because he tried to open the wrong container. And when he saw what was inside, he was fired immediately. For the sake of this story, let's call him John Smith. He was active duty, stationed on a naval base, and his job was straightforward. He had to process shipping containers, day in and day out. He cuts the seals, he logs the numbers, he opens the doors, and he made sure the manifests matched. It was a routine, mechanical, kind of forgettable, until the night one container changed his life forever. It was a late summer evening, the kind of night where the heat still pressed down even after the sun had disappeared. The asphalt radiated with warmth, and every container in that yard felt hot to the touch, except one. When Smith rested his hand against it, the steel was cold. Not ice cold, not frozen, but wrong for the environment. He guessed maybe 40 degrees or so, cold enough that in the humid night air, it felt like an icebox. He checked the paperwork. That's when it got strange. The manifest didn't line up. No hazmat diamonds, no refrigeration codes, no standard designations he recognized. Just a string of letters and numbers that didn't belong to any system that he had seen. He frowned. He called the sealed number into his log and set the cutters. Normally, seals snap with little effort. You clamp down and it's done. This one wouldn't give. He leaned into it, teeth clenching, his arms straining, but the blade slid off the metal like it was tougher than usual, or fused somehow. He reset his grip and tried again. And that's when he heard the boots. His supervisor came up fast. No greeting, no small talk, just one sharp order. Step away, that one's not yours. Smith blinked, confused. The seal matches my list, he said, holding up the paperwork. The supervisor didn't even look. His tone hardened, his jaw locked. Not anymore, higher clearance crew's taking it tonight. You don't go near it again, you understand? For anyone who's ever worked Navy cargo, here's the thing. There are no exceptions. Every container gets logged, every seal gets checked, every door gets opened. That's the system. That's how you keep track of what's moving in and what's moving out of secure yards. But this was an exception. And the way the order was delivered, like fast, nervous, and final, told Smith this wasn't a mistake. He stepped back, he walked away. He did what he was told, but his mind didn't let go. A container cold enough to fog in 90-degree heat, a manifest that made no sense, a seal that wouldn't snap, and a supervisor acting like he just tried to pry open a coffin. Back at the barracks, Smith couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling. The Navy didn't make errors like this. If it was on his list, it was his responsibility. Suddenly it belonged to someone else. Someone with more clearance, more authority, more secrets. Well, the next evening, the container was still there, parked by itself, separate from the others, sitting under the yard lights like it was waiting. From 20 feet away, he could still feel the cold leaking into the air. Not frozen, not dangerous, just unnatural and wrong. Most men would have taken the order and buried the memory under a pile of routine, but not Smith. He wasn't reckless, and he wasn't trying to be a hero, but curiosity doesn't fade, it digs in. And by the time his shift ended that night, he already knew what he was going to do. He was going to go back. He told himself he wasn't going to do it. He tried to convince himself it wasn't worth the trouble, that curiosity wasn't worth a mark on his record. But when you work the same job long enough, you learn the rhythm of normal. And when something breaks that rhythm, it won't leave you alone. That container had broken it. It was past midnight when he made his move. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the yard. His shift was over. His rack was waiting, but instead, he slipped through the shadows, moving slow, sticking to the dark spots between the security lights. He knew the patrol patterns. He knew when the rovers circled by. He had worked this ground long enough to map it out in his head. From the moment he got close, he felt it again. The cold. The air around that single container was different, carrying a chill that didn't belong in the humid night. Even from a distance, it brushed up against his skin. He crouched behind a stack of pallets just out of sight and waited. Minutes stretched, then he saw them. Not his crew, not men he recognized. It was a convoy that rolled in through the far gate, driving these black utility trucks with no markings. Their headlights cut through the dark as they parked in a tight half circle around the container. The doors opened and men stepped out. Not sailors, not contractors, a special team. They moved with precision. No wasted steps, no talking. Every one of them was in dark fatigues, some with hazmat hoods, others with respirators slung around their necks. They were carrying pry bars, portable lights, and monitoring gear. Smith had never seen this used in the yard. A few wore sidearms, and their hands never far from the grips. One of them barked a short order, clipped and flat. The others fell in line. They surrounded the containers, inspecting every latch, every seam. And a man in a suit, yes, a suit, was out there in the yard, reading something off a clipboard as he's just like nodding. That's when two of the team went to work on the seal. Smith leaned forward in the shadows, his heart pounding. They didn't use cutters, they used a torch. Sparks rained as the metal hissed and glowed. For nearly 10 minutes they cut into what he had failed to open the night before. And when they finally broke through, they all stepped back, like they were opening something alive. The door groaned, stiff from the cold, and the fog just came pouring out. Not steam or smoke, just heavy condensation of chilled air hitting the heat of the night. The whole container breathed like an ice chest that was cracked open after hours of being in the sun. Inside, just for a moment, Smith saw something. His angle was bad, but the light from the lamps reached deep enough to cast shadows across the interior. At first, it looked like equipment, massive shapes under heavy tarps. Then, one of those tarps shifted, sliding just enough to reveal what was underneath. It wasn't cargo. It was a figure, large and humanoid, strapped upright in a steel brace with frost clinging to its skin. It was pale and rigid and massive. Even from where Smith crouched, he could tell it was bigger than any man that he had ever seen. One of the hazmat men quickly pulled the tarp back over it, and another snapped at him for letting it slip. The team worked faster now, moving with urgency, rolling in a portable generator and a climate unit, hooking up cables like they were preparing to transfer the whole thing. Smith's pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed lower into the shadows, forcing himself not to breathe too loud. He knew that he shouldn't be there. He knew that if they spotted him, it was over, but he couldn't look away. They worked another 20 minutes securing the figure, running instruments over it, recording data. Every so often, one of the monitors beeped in a way that Smith didn't understand, and the men in charge exchanged quick, tense glances. Then a flashlight beam swung wide, not toward the container, but toward the pallets, toward Smith. He dropped flat on the ground. The beam swept past, but his chest felt like it was going to explode. He waited, heart hammering, until the light moved away. The team finished their work, sealing the container again with a new lock, one that he had never seen before. Then, under the cover of night, they loaded it onto a flatbed, chained it down, and drove it out of the yard in a convoy. No one spoke, no one lingered, and just like that, it was gone. Smith stayed frozen in place long after the engines faded. When he finally stood, the yard was empty and silent again. The container had vanished like it had never been there. But he knew what he had seen. He knew what was strapped inside, and he knew one other thing he wasn't supposed to know. By the next morning, John knew something was wrong. The container was gone. The yard looked normal, but the atmosphere wasn't. People were acting a little off. Supervisors were quieter than usual, checking clipboards without really reading them, whispering just out of earshot. It felt like the base had a secret that everybody knew, but no one could say. John tried to play it cool. He went about his work, cutting seals, logging numbers, opening the containers like nothing had ever happened. But he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen the night before. That figure, strapped upright and frozen in place. and just way too large to be human. He kept seeing the frost peeling off its shoulders, the way the hazmat team moved faster once the tarp slipped. He told himself to just keep quiet. He told himself that speaking about it to anyone would be suicide. But his face must have betrayed something, because before the end of his shift, he got the call. Report to the office now. Inside, 2 men were waiting, and they weren't his supervisor or anyone that he recognized. These were men in plain uniforms. No names on their chests, no patches. They asked him to sit. They didn't waste any time. You were near the container 742 last night. Smith froze. His first instinct was to deny it, but the way they looked at him, flat and unblinking, told him that they already knew. There were cameras in the yard, of course. He thought he had stayed in the shadows, but shadows only go so far. I was on duty, he said. I logged the seal. The numbers match my manifest. One of the men leaned forward. You weren't on duty when that container was open. You were off the clock and you were still there. The silence after that line stretched long enough for Smith to feel sweat roll down his back. He tried to explain it away, said he was checking the area, said he couldn't sleep, but the words felt hollow even to him. Finally, one of them spoke. You saw something, didn't you? Smith swallowed. His throat was dry. He wanted to say no, he wanted to lie, but lying to men like this never ends well. I don't know what to say, he said. That was the truth, wasn't it? He didn't know. It looked like a giant frozen in place, but maybe it was equipment. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe. The men exchanged a glance, then stood. You're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You'll be reassigned, and your clearance is revoked. Don't discuss this with anyone, do you understand? Smith nodded, but his mind reeled. That was it. Years of steady work gone in a single order. Reassignment meant desk duty or busy work or a dead-end path that led nowhere. Revoked clearance meant that his career path there was effectively over. He was still active duty, yes, but without the trust and without the access, he felt like he was finished. As he walked out of the office, his supervisor wouldn't even meet his eyes. That told him everything. Word had gotten around. He was kind of radioactive now. That night, Smith sat alone in the barracks. Around him, the usual noise. Men laughing, swapping stories, calling home. But he felt cut off from all of it. He replayed that moment in his head over and over. The cold steel under his hand. The hiss of that torch cutting through that seal. And the fog rolling out. And that pale figure under the tarp. He just couldn't shake it. And then came the whispers. Not from him, but from some others. His closest friend in the unit told him he had overheard 2 people talking about it. They said the container had been holding something biological, a specimen, something recovered years ago and kept on ice ever since. The friend lowered his voice and said that the word had been floating around since, creature. Smith tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in his throat. His friend's expression didn't change. He wasn't joking. He said the men who opened it were a traveling crew, a unit that handled only special shipments. And every time they came, somebody local ended up getting reassigned. That's when it sank in. This wasn't an accident. He had been caught in a coincidence. This was a procedure. He stepped into part of the machine he was never supposed to see. So he had 2 choices: pretend he knew nothing, or let the weight of what he had seen crush him. The Navy had already made its choice. They'd taken away his clearance and taken away his post and left him with nothing but questions. And those questions about the figure in the cold container, about why it needed a special crew, and about why it had to move under darkness, they weren't going away. Smith didn't get thrown out of the Navy, but that's not how it works. But after that night, he was reassigned. And in his world, that was the end of the line. He lost his clearance. He lost his post in the yard, and he found himself stuck in a job that had nothing to do with what he was trained for. In the military, that's how a career dies. Not with a court-martial or headlines, but with a quiet transfer that locks every door in front of you. Officially, nothing happened. Records stayed clean. No charges, no marks. To anyone outside the chain of command, it looked like a routine move. But to Smith, It was a signal that he had brushed up against something bigger than him, something the Navy didn't want him near again. He never talked about it with the others. He didn't whisper, he didn't speculate, or even joke. That wasn't self-control, it was a survival instinct. When your clearance disappears, so does your trust of everyone around you. People stop asking questions, they stop making conversation. It's like you don't exist anymore, except to serve as a reminder to everyone else. Don't make this same mistake. But Smith carried the memory. He couldn't get rid of it. He kept seeing that condensation roll out of those doors. He kept wondering what all of this meant. He knew better than to put his thoughts down in writing, and he didn't keep a record of anything. But when he trusted someone enough, when the story came out in fragments, he said the same thing. It wasn't cargo, it was a figure, upright, strapped into a brace, bigger than any man that he's ever seen. And this whole thing was just like cold to the touch. Even from 20 feet away, you could feel the cold. Well, years later, when he was out of the Navy, he still chose his words carefully. He didn't say it was an experiment. He didn't call it a weapon, or he didn't claim that it was some myth out of folklore. He just repeated the facts the way he remembered them. Now, the rest is speculation. Some people say cryogenic preservation, and some say recovered remains. Others argue it was just sensitive equipment and the whole story is an exaggeration. But that doesn't change what Smith saw, or what happened after. He had touched the wrong container, and he lost his post. And that part's certain. So what was inside? Was it a failed experiment, locked away in cold storage until it could be moved? Was it something recovered from the ice, shipped from one secure facility to another? Or was it something even stranger? Something not meant for ordinary sailors to see? Smith can't answer that. All he can say is that he brushed against the secret. The Navy made sure he wouldn't brush against another one. His days in the yard were over, his clearance was gone, and his career was mostly finished. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just what he saw, but what it cost him. Because in the Navy, some containers aren't just supplies, but others carry something else. Something that changes the life of anyone who gets too close.